we have Issa in Ohio has a question for us about the existence of the universe. Welcome, Issa.
Hey, guys. Thank you very much for having me. So, yeah, basically, me and my friend who's a fan of your show, we're always discussing the existence of God and whether there's God or not, and where all this came from. I just wanted to, as a theist, as a person that believes in God, it's very difficult for me to understand how atheists pretty much don't believe in God. And not only that, but also how do they explain where all this came from and where all this complex and, I would argue, finely tuned.
Do you believe in the Big Bang?
I do believe in the Big Bang, yes.
Okay, so I think the difference is
the Big Bang,
you believe that God... Right, so you believe that God is responsible for the Big Bang, and we don't believe that.
For example, the best example that I could use for now is if you look at an iPhone, it's complex. It requires someone with intelligence to make it. Engineers and so forth and so on, and people who
the universe is not like an iPhone.
Yes. No. I'm just using that as an example. The universe would be far more complex. It would be absurd for me, in my opinion, to just say that a Big Bang happened and all this came about. Do you see where I'm coming from?
So the universe, from my understanding, is not that complex at its core, right? What it has is a relatively simple set of rules, and it has a property, it has emergent properties that from which complexity arises, right? And so it's just the fact that we've had, the universe follows certain rules. It contains matter, and there's been a sufficient period of time that these rules that we call the laws of physics, which is ultimately just the way the universe works, that has given rise to complex things. It's not like the universe necessarily contained the complex things at its onset, right? The complexity was developed. Because if you think about it, at the very beginning, if you believe in the Big Bang Theory, then the universe was a singularity, which is, potentially the least complex thing, right? It is a single point, but it depends on your definition of complexity.
The question I have is that you said you accept Big Bang cosmology, but you add something to it. You add something to that. Do you have some knowledge or evidence that all of the cosmologists who don't add God to it, do you have some knowledge that they don't have?
Well, I would say, to believe in, basically what I was saying is that just.
So let me pause, because since I asked you a question about do you have knowledge or evidence that the cosmologists who don't add God to this equation are missing, since I've asked that, all you've said is, I would say that, I would say that, I would say. Do you have knowledge or evidence?
No.
For why you insert a God where the experts on cosmology don't?
There was another gentleman speaking, so I was actually going to ask a follow-up question on him.
I just asked you a question. Are you going to answer it?
Answer Matt's question.
Sorry.
I'll repeat it again. Do you have knowledge or evidence that supports your claim that you should add a God to this, that the cosmologists who don't add a God to this are missing?
Well, my answer to that would be basically it's common sense.
Okay.
Think about
so
it.
Your answer to that would be no.
Everything.
No. Your answer to that would be no. I asked you if you had knowledge or evidence that the cosmologists are missing, for which you are using that to add a God to this equation, and your answer is it's common sense. Well, I'm sorry, but common sense is neither knowledge or evidence, and it should not be accepted. And not only that, but it may seem to be common sense for you, but it's not common sense for the rest of us, because my common sense says that when there are people who've studied this for their entire lives and have come up with a physics model that does not make an appeal to a God, if somebody else wants to add a God to it, they have to come with something more than that's what makes sense to me.
Well, I would say, to believe in God, it's a very, very, I would say it actually makes sense, because do you believe that the world is complex and it's finally true?
That's not relevant, sir. That's not relevant. I asked you if you had knowledge or evidence that the rest of us are missing that demonstrate a God exists. Complexity is not the hallmark of design. Simplicity is the hallmark of design. Efficiency is the hallmark of design. And complexity arises. The universe, as MD Aware was pointing out, based on Big Bang cosmology, was not complex in the beginning, and complexity has broadened and expanded. That's a process by evolutionary change when we're talking about the biodiversity of life, etc. But when I asked you a question about whether you had knowledge or evidence, you say it's common sense. And now you want to say, do I think the universe is complex? Here's the thing. We could go back to your original statement. And your statement is, you don't understand how atheists who don't have a belief in God explain the origin of the universe. Now, we pointed out Big Bang cosmology, but what if the answer is, we don't have an explanation for the universe, and neither do you, until you demonstrate that you do?
No. Let me ask you this. Could it be God?
No, sir, you're not going to ask any questions, because I just gave you a 101 lecture. You didn't acknowledge any point. You didn't say that you understood it. You didn't point out where I was wrong. You didn't agree about anything. You're not listening.
Trying to just ask you a question, because I called to ask you a question and try to understand your point. You're a little bit being aggressive. And
I'm a little bit going to hang up on your ass.
So I called to ask you a question.
Ask your question, Issa. Ask your question.
I'm not here to be interviewed, but go ahead, ask your question. I already answered it, by the way.
Okay. Yes, but you're not letting me speak. Though you're not letting me ask.
If you'd stop whining and ask your question, we'd have already been there. Ask your question now.
So my question is basically the gentleman that I was asking, where do you think, when he was explaining the matter and all that stuff, it must have come from somewhere, though. It's just not. Is he saying that
again, I'm not an astrophysicist. I've taken university level courses in astronomy and astrophysics. And if you want to know more, you should do the same, or buy a astrophysics textbook or read up on it. Because if you want to know, scientists have figured out to varying degrees of certainty what happened at the beginning of the universe and how it evolved from there. And there is, to my understanding, a kind of hard limit. We can't go earlier than the first few nanoseconds after the Big Bang began. And we don't have access to that knowledge because we cannot study it. And so I think that if you're trying to claim anything about what happened before then you don't have any scientific legs to stand on. And again, I would say if you don't have scientific legs to stand on, then you don't have any legs to stand on at all.
But you also demonstrated that you weren't listening at all, because your question is, where do we think the matter came from? And MD Aware pointed out that Big Bang cosmology suggests that it didn't come from anywhere. It always existed as a singularity. And I pointed out that in addition to that, what if the answer is we don't know and you don't either? And so if I'm not making a claim about where it came from, and you're the one who's adopted the burden of proof. And when I asked you to demonstrate the knowledge or evidence to support your claim that a God did it, your only statement was that it was common sense. You didn't listen to the answers we gave, and you didn't provide anything of substance for your belief. I'm not the one here who's believing something without a good reason.
And the last thing I'll say, Issa, is you have to think about whether common sense is appropriate to apply in a situation like this. And I would argue that common sense is reasonable for things that are common in your life, right? But we don't have a common, common experience of the origin of the universe. And so you have to be a little bit more careful. If you talk to any quantum physicists, they'll tell you that, quantum physics is extremely non-intuitive. Your common sense will fail you when you try to stack it up against the math or the evidence. And so you have to think about whether common sense is something that you should even be turning to in any situation, but particularly in situations like this, where we have good reason to believe that common sense may lead you to the wrong answer.
Like, I know you guys are busy right now, but one thing I'm going to say last is, as you guys already, from what I understood from you guys, from where it all comes from, you guys don't you say we don't know yet. So my question is, could it be God?
I don't know. In order for us to determine that it could be God, somebody needs to demonstrate that it's actually possible that a God is the explanation for it. Can you do that?
So, well, then, since
can you do that?
No. My question is, could it be God?
No, sir. I answered your question. Now answer mine or go the fuck away. Can you demonstrate that the answer could be God?
I don't know why you're using foul language. But
okay, you're done, because I'm done being told what kind of language I can use on the show. I'm not the one here advocating belief in something without a good reason. I'm not the one who's avoiding questions. Not only did MD Aware answer your question, I answered it. We pointed it out twice. You're not listening. And now you want to know, since we say we don't know what the explanation is, could it be God? And I answered that question by saying, I don't know. Can you demonstrate that it is? And now you want to talk about how I use foul language. Go fuck yourself.